Brought to you by FPI, setting the standard.
Now, we've got two professional bodies sitting here today. One is the Financial Planning Standards Board, which is a global body. The other, the Financial Planning Institute. Prem, I'm going to start with you. Financial Planning Standards Board, what is it and what does it aim to achieve?
The Financial Planning Standards Board is the global standard setting body for financial planners, owner of the CFP mark, Certified Financial Planner. The FPSB licenses this mark in the 23 affiliate countries, of which South Africa is one of those. The Financial Planning Institute is the body that literally represents the FPSB and the CFP mark in South Africa.
Okay, so it's really the custodian of that CFP mark, like you said, yes. And really trying to my mind, what I always understood was to try and set the scene in terms of understanding what it is to be a professional in the financial planning services industry, I guess.
Right.
Gerhardt, from your point of view, obviously the Financial Planning Institute is one of those 23 member countries, mm-hmm. and perhaps the local chapter, if you like. Where do you see it fitting into the industry here locally?
Well, the Financial Planning Institute is the only professional body for professional financial planners in South Africa. So our byline is setting the standard, and very importantly, we also enforce that standard. So what we see very much as our goal is to make sure that professional financial planners adhere to a specific standard, adhere to a code of conduct and a code of ethics, so that the consumer out there knows that when he deals with a member of the FPI, which includes not only CFP professionals but also two other classes of membership, that they can expect a certain category of service and quality of professional service. And that's what we on an ongoing basis stand for and enforce.
Just to perhaps take a step back, I mean, like I said up front, the industry has perhaps not got the best name out there, and I think there's a lot of terms that are out there. You know, you've got financial advisors, financial consultants, brokers, planners, and the list really goes on. Really, is this a way of trying to get to a point where we can understand if we're dealing with a certified financial planner or the like, we're going to expect some sort of level of service and expertise?
Absolutely, you can. You can, as one thing, as I mentioned, you can expect that there'd be an adherence to a code of conduct. Also, you could expect that you take it through the Financial Planning Institute and the FPSB 6-step financial planning process, which is a comprehensive financial planning process which does not rely on a product sale necessarily coming in at the end of that financial planning process. It's not inconceivable, Sean, as an example, that the best financial advice I could give to you today is to settle your bond. And if that's the best financial advice I could give you, why sell you a product?
Sure.
So that's what the Financial Planning Institute is all about.
So if it's really sort of selling your advice as opposed to selling a product, I mean, the key question of remuneration has to come into it. And I know we're going to be exploring this perhaps in greater detail in further shows, but I mean, that's something that seems to be shifting, not only globally and locally, but saying, well, how do we actually structure remuneration to make sure the best advice or appropriate advice is achievable?
I'd say with difficulty right now. But look, I'm encouraged by the fact that this is a very young profession. If you think back, in the United States, it's probably 50 years old. In South Africa, close on 30 years old. And when you look at other professions like that of medicine and law, I mean, they're hundreds of years old. And they must have started somewhere too. And for me, we've embarked on this road to professionalism. At the FPSB, that's our next conversation, what remuneration should be and how we tie it in with our 23 affiliate countries. So yes, we are getting there from a global perspective. On the local side?
On the local side, there's still quite a bit to be done. I think what one must be cautious of is that the debate in my mind when one talks around commission versus fees on its own in a vacuum is a red herring debate.
Sure.
To me, what is most important is that the consumer knows what services they get and what they pay for those services.
And whether there's value in that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How that fee is facilitated to me is not that important, provided the consumer has agreed to paying that fee for those services. That's a principle that I'd like to see entrenched in legislation in South Africa going forward. What we've seen happen in some other countries, particularly in the UK and the US over the last months, with implementation dates in the near future, is that the regulator there seems to have taken a view that people aren't going to comply with principles, and we've seen a complete ban on commission, specifically on investment products. So I'd very much hate for us to get to a point where our regulator feels that we can't comply with principles and has to lay down the law like that and say, these are the rules, tick the boxes, do it like this. Because that to me is not the best evidence of a profession growing.
And obviously the regulator we're speaking of primarily is the Financial Services Board. Perhaps the biggest piece of legislation to my mind in the last decade was the Financial and Intermediary Services Act of 2002. Came in 8 years ago. I think that was a big turning point in the industry in getting it somewhere from a professionalism point of view. We've got professional bodies, that's fantastic, but we needed the regulator to come through and actually put some laws in place to be able to give it a bit of bite.
Absolutely. We fully supported the introduction of the FASE Act. We continue to support it. There's some very interesting, in our view, positive evolution of that Act on the go at the moment. The one thing in the FASE Act that we're not that keen on is the fact that it still links back to product. So there is one gets a license that says you may advise on and then sell the following products. Whereas, as I said earlier, financial advice or financial planning doesn't have to be about a product. It can be only about selling financial planning or financial advice. But we are seeing a slow shift away from that. We've also seen a recent development where the avoidance of conflicts of interest that's always been in the legislation has been further entrenched now through a new code of conduct. And there's some principles in there which I'm very keen on, and I'm happy to see that that the regulator's gone with principle-based legislation, and there are a couple of rules in there that the guys have to comply with, which again is good. But in my mind, we're at a point now where if we can comply with the principles, we won't necessarily force the regulator to a position where the regulator feels, I need to give you more specific rules.
Yes, yeah. And just, I mean, comparing that to a global perspective, where are we in relation to how not only the industry but the profession has advanced in other countries such as America, Australia, and the like? I mean, where would you put us at this stage?
Sean, I'd like to say that as an emerging market, we're actually at the forefront. It was a pleasant surprise even to me when I joined the FPSB board to find that the legislation that we have in place is actually on par with that of Australia, the UK, and these are generally the more developed markets, and so I'm very happy to say that we are at the forefront. Okay. What's interesting is countries like India, New Zealand are now going through the pain of regulation, and very interesting to see how they are coping with this. However, on the global front, I can't see that there's any escaping of regulation.
You spoke briefly around the conflict of interest, and I think for those watching out there, I mean, probably the biggest thing that comes to mind is overseas trips for brokers, advisors, whatever the case may be. Those types of things getting totally pushed aside now.
They've been banned completely.
So which is good news again, that thing of coming back to say, I'm not encouraged to sell one product over the other.
Absolutely.
Certainly from that point of view in conflicts of interest. Another one is treating customers fairly. I mean, at the end of the day, people were coming with looking for financial advice, and if that's all they're asking, that should be the minimum of what we should be able to give them, right?
The FSB released a discussion paper some months ago, referred to as the Treating Customers Fairly discussion paper. It's based largely on a process that the UK's FSA, as it is at the time, still went through over the last few years, and really it is what it says. It's about treating your customers fairly, and it speaks to both financial planners and to product providers out there, and there are various principles in it. And the thinking at the FSB, as I anecdotally understand it, is to see those principles coming into all the legislation regulated by the FSB over the coming years, and that's a good thing. The FPI is supportive of that, the FPSB is supportive of that. So from our perspective,
and if I may just add, the Treating Customers Fairly document broadly outlines 6 outcomes, and what's interesting is that all 6 outcomes are there to protect the consumer.
Okay, so it's all consumer focused at the end.
Very much consumer focused.
Getting back to the FPSB, I mean, I've read up, the vision is really to have financial planning recognised as a distinct professional practice around the world. Okay, how close are we getting to that, getting right on that?
I have to admit, with just 23 affiliates, most of which sit in the Asia Pacific region, we're not nearly where we would like to be. But what's interesting is that there are countries that are constantly knocking at the door of the FPSB, wanting to become affiliates. Interestingly, at our Seoul meeting, we've just approved Colombia as an associate member, meaning that they have 2 years. In the next 2 years, they would need to put their program together and start offering the CFP mark. In 2 years' time, they will come back to us with a proposal, not really a proposal, with their standards in place, their education in place, and we would approve them as a fully fledged affiliate.
Okay, so one more country down, hopefully, or coming on board. I think, I mean, from your point of view, Gerhardt, we've spoken about the regulation, and Prem's highlighted that from a regulatory point of view, we're really in the forefront when it comes globally. But again, we come back to that professionalism. Again, we come back to that ethics. You know, how far down the road are we, and how much have we still got to go on that?
I think the most important thing is that one enforces that, and that's also the most tricky thing to do. It's much easier to enforce something like, did you disclose your fees, than did you comply with a set of ethics. So definitely from the FPI's perspective, we've got enforcement structures in place to make sure that we enforce ethics, codes of conduct, and not only things such as, did you tick a box, did you disclose your commission. Yeah. What is important, I can add to what Prem is saying about the international work, and I'd like to add two things to it, is what makes me very proud about being involved at the FPSB as the council representative for this country is that South Africans are doing so much of the work. A few years ago, when I was elected chair of the Financial Planning Institute, I started going to FPSB council meetings. The FPSB had no international standards, had no quality measures that they can apply across members. We've got a whole lot of that now at FPSB level, mainly thanks to the work of a former Financial Planning Institute board member. That's fantastic. Yeah. The other thing I'd like to add is that when you look at regulation, we had a gentleman speak to us at the Seoul meeting from IOSCO, which is the overall body where regulators around the world get to meet. Everything that they're highlighting as issues for IOSCO and for regulators around the world are issues that we are aware of and that we've dealt with in this country. The one interesting thing that we don't really have in much detail in our current regulation is the line of thinking that says that you must make sure that your client is sufficiently educated around the financial product that you recommend, which I think is a great thing. And we spoke around treating customers fairly, which will touch on that as well. So that puts the client or the consumer in the pound seats. It makes the consumer, makes him able to make decisions and inform decisions.
It's really a question of empowerment, isn't it?
Absolutely a question of empowerment.